Feels symbolic to shut that door and not try to troubleshoot anymore. Today's story in the Old Testament is probably my favorite episode in the Abraham narrative. One of the things I love the most about this story is it reinforces this idea that it's okay to talk back to God or to, give God the peace of your mind. Up until this part of the story, Abram's response to every command from God has been silent obedience. But this time, Abram starts to give God a piece of his mind. When God makes this promise and says, your reward will be very great, he says, how do I know? You have not provided with me what I have wanted. I like to think that what Abram's really saying is, I've taken matters into my own hands. I have appointed Eliezer as my steward, as my heir, because you haven't come through on your promises. And then he sees the stars. God takes him outside and shows him all the stars in the sky, and he trusts again. But then he questions him again. This is very relatable to me, this flip-flopping. One minute you trust God, the next minute you're saying, God, where are you? How can I possibly believe what it is that you're saying? And I think this part of the story is so relevant because so many times I say to God, I've taken things into my own hands. Thank you. I appreciate everything you've done for me up until this point, but I'm going to take it from here. I've got my Eliezer in the wings, ready to stand in. And so that's the first part of the story that I just immediately am like, yes, Abram, I see where you are coming from. And then we get to this weird part of the story about the covenant with this specific list of animals, and Abram kills them and then is shooing away the vultures as they're trying to swoop down. And I think it's important to know that this is a very typical type of covenant in the ancient Near East. And you would slaughter these animals and then arrange them in 2 rows. And then the 2 people making the covenant would pass through the center of these animals. And that would seal the covenant. That would be like the handshake that makes it formal and official. And the thinking is, if you break the pact, if you break the covenant, you become like these animals. So it's this very visceral idea of what you're supposed to do in reaction to to keep up this covenant. The only problem with this is that Abram passes out before he can do his part. So he doesn't pass through these animals at all. He's asleep when this covenant is sealed. And I think about what a beautiful testimony that is, because how many times are we trying to get something arranged or fixed in our lives and it transforms almost without our doing anything? Sometimes it takes a lot of hard work. I mean, Abram was waving away these vultures all day. He's so tired, he falls asleep into a deep sleep, the same kind of sleep that Adam falls into. That's the same Hebrew word when God takes the rib from Adam to create Eve. So there's this idea that in these 2 really pivotal moments in the salvation history, the person involved is not an agent, is not performing of their own ability. It's God who's doing the work. This is kind of a one-sided covenant, a one-way sort of love. And even though Abram was unconscious, he's terrified, he has no part to play in the formation of this covenant, it still stands. This is the covenant on which all of Judean Christian theology is based. But nothing Abram did qualified him or disqualified him from this covenant, which is good because up until this point, Abram has not been an upstanding citizen. And our story alludes to this when it says, after these events. Well, the events the story is talking about is Abram fleeing with his wife Sarai into Egypt. Abram lies about Sarai's identity, tells the people of Egypt that she's his sister, not his wife. She gets taken into a harem and treated the way I imagine you would be treated as a member of a harem. And then they leave and they get into all these fights with their clansmen and the Canaanites. And in Egypt, Abram has become enormously wealthy, but he has not been what I would consider a role model for my children. And yet, after these events is when God says, all right, Abram, I will make my covenant with you. I will make your heirs as numerous as the stars in the sky. And again, there's this idea that it is not up to us to qualify for God's love. God's love does not have an asterisk. It does not have a series of qualifications, a litmus test that you have to pass before you are eligible to be a recipient of this one-way kind of love. Tit for tat is not the way of God. God's love has no terms or conditions, and there is nothing that you can do to qualify for or be disqualified from God's love. And this seems way too good to be true. I think it sort of stirs up every part of our identity that's based on fairness and equality. We want to say, okay, no, you do certain things and you get certain things back in return. We live our lives based on these principles of exchange. Our social norms, our social relationships are based on exchange. Our economic system is based on exchange. Everything in our lives is based on this idea of reciprocity. And so God's one-way, lopsided kind of love is something that is hard for us to wrap our heads around. So if you think, I'm not really sure I get that, that's fine. That's normal. But congratulations, you're a normal human being. But what makes you good at economics and what makes you good at reputation and positive social interaction is not the same thing that makes you good at Christianity. They're different kinds of ways of being in the world. And this is where I think we're called to be in the world and not of the world. I'm not saying you need to be a sucker, that you need to, just go to the grocery store and give them all your money, but leave without any groceries. That's not what I'm saying. But I think being aware of when is this one-way kind of love at work in your life is a doorway into transformation. And this one-way kind of love makes us uncomfortable because it's outside of our locus of control. And when we're the recipient of that kind of love, we often don't trust it. We wonder if there's some sort of ulterior motive at play. It's not, we get confused when doing A doesn't cause B, and all of a sudden that equation breaks down. But it reminds me of my summers at Lake Ouachita. I grew up a lake kid. We were over there almost every weekend in the summer. And my dad, while he was a talented water skier, was not a talented mechanic. And we spent more time than I remember stranded on the lake for a variety of reasons. There's not a lot of clarity in the family about how many times this happened, but I do remember on at least 2 different occasions, we sunk a propeller, like to the bottom of the lake. My dad started keeping a snorkel, a toolbox, a knife, all of these things in the boat so that when we got a ski rope wrapped around the propeller or we ran aground on a sandbar, he could try to fix it. Well, he never fixed it. He could never fix it. And so I have these vivid memories of all 5 of us standing in the boat, waving down somebody to come and tow us to shore. We had a single canoe paddle, but a single canoe paddle is not going to get a ski boat very far across Lake Ouachita. So we always had to get a tow into the marina. At that point, when my dad would acknowledge defeat and wave down the other, whoever was passing by, there was nothing more we could do at that point. All we could do was embrace the tow, tie up the rope, and hope for the best. There was always somebody there to tow us in. We never, had to spend the night out on the lake, but embracing the tow was what I learned from those summers at Lake Ouachita. And I think that's sort of what Abram is doing here. He's embracing the tow. He's embracing God's toe through this covenant, through this promise that's being made. He recognizes that it doesn't make sense. There's nothing he can offer God, but he can simply accept it, accept the promise, accept the goodness that will come from this covenant. When we embrace this one-way kind of love, I think we then are able to share it with one another. And this is a passage I found this week by Paul Zoll that really sums up what happens when we embrace the toe. Grace is one-way love. Watch other people. You will see it over and over. One-way love lifts up. One-way love cures. One-way love transforms. It is the change agent of life. Abram knew this, and we know this. One-way love, which is God's primary way of loving us. It's the kind of love that scoops up vulnerable baby chicks and protects them like a mama hen. That one-way kind of love is God's gift to us. It is the change agent of life. It's the change agent of my life. It's the change agent of the lives of other people. One-way love is our call, is our covenant, is our promise. Thanks be to God.